The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty street of Willowbrook, a small frontier town nestled between rolling hills and endless prairie. Alina pulled her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders as she hurried toward the general store, keeping her eyes fixed on the wooden sidewalk beneath her feet. The purple bruise on her left cheek had faded to a sickly yellow-green color, but she still felt the shame burning in her chest like a hot coal. Her husband's rage 3 nights ago had been worse than usual. The whiskey had made him violent, and when she accidentally dropped his dinner plate while serving him, his fist had connected with her face before she could duck away. The sound of the ceramic shattering on the floor still echoed in her memory, along with his slurred threats about what would happen if she ever embarrassed him again in front of his drinking companions. Alina pushed open the heavy wooden door of Morrison's general store, the brass bell above jangling cheerfully in stark contrast to her dark mood. Old Mr. Morrison looked up from his ledger with a kind smile that faltered when he noticed her injured face. She had grown accustomed to these reactions from the townspeople over the past 2 years of marriage to Jake Brennan.
"I am mourning, Mrs. Brennan,"
Morrison said gently, his weathered hands folding the ledger closed. "What can I help you with today?" Lena fumbled in her small cloth purse for the short list Jake had given her that morning. Flour, sugar, coffee, and ammunition for his rifle. Always ammunition. Her husband spent most of his time hunting or drinking, sometimes both activities combined in ways that made the neighbors nervous about stray bullets finding their way into town, as she quietly recited her needs to the storekeeper. The bell above the door chimed again. Lena instinctively stepped aside to make room for the new customer, her head bowed in the submissive posture that had become second nature during her marriage. She expected to see one of the local ranchers, or perhaps the Methodist preacher making his weekly rounds. Instead, she found herself looking at a pair of well-worn leather boots decorated with intricate beadwork and patterns she had never seen before. Her eyes traveled upward to take in deerskin leggings, a simple cotton shirt, and finally the face of a man unlike anyone she had ever encountered in Willowbrook. He was clearly Native American, probably Apache, based on the stories she had heard from travelers passing through town. His long black hair was braided with small feathers and beads that caught the morning light streaming through the store's windows. His skin was bronzed by years of desert sun, and his dark eyes held an intelligence and gentleness that seemed completely at odds with the fearsome reputation of his people. Alina quickly looked away, remembering Jake's frequent warnings about the dangers of Indians in the territory. He had filled her head with stories of raids and violence, though she had begun to suspect that many of his tales were exaggerated or entirely fictional. This man certainly didn't look like the savage monster her husband had described. The stranger approached the counter with quiet confidence, his movements graceful and purposeful. When he spoke, his English was clear and educated, surprising Alina with its cultured tone. "Good morning," he said to Morrison, completely ignoring the storekeeper's obvious nervousness. "I need supplies for a hunting trip. Dried meat, salt, and perhaps some of that good coffee I smell brewing in the back room." Morrison glanced anxiously between his 2 customers, clearly uncomfortable with having a white woman and an Apache warrior in his store at the same time. The territorial tensions had been high recently, with rumors of conflicts between settlers and various tribes creating an atmosphere of mutual suspicion and fear. Alina continued studying her feet, but she could feel the stranger's presence like warmth from a fire. There was something about him that made her want to look up, to meet his eyes and see if the kindness she had glimpsed there was real, or just her imagination playing tricks on her lonely heart.
"What?"
"Don't look at me," she whispered, so quietly that she wasn't sure anyone could hear her. The words escaped her lips before she could stop them, born from years of Jake's commands to keep her eyes down, her mouth shut when strangers were present. But the Apache warrior had heard her soft plea, and instead of respecting her request, he turned to face her directly. His dark eyes studied her bruised face with an expression that made Alina's breath catch in her throat. There was no pity there, no disgust at her appearance, no judgment about her circumstances. Instead, she saw something that made her heart skip beats she had forgotten it could make. He was looking at her as if she were beautiful, more than beautiful. He was looking at her as if she were precious, valuable, worthy of respect and admiration. No one had looked at her that way since before her marriage, perhaps never with such intensity and genuine appreciation. "Your husband did this to you," the warrior said simply, his voice carrying no question. It was a statement of fact delivered, with quiet certainty, as if he could read the story of her suffering in the fading colors of her bruise. Elena's hand flew to her cheek instinctively, covering the evidence of Jake's violence with trembling fingers. She wanted to deny it, to protect her husband's reputation as she had been trained to do. But something in the stranger's eyes made lying impossible. Morrison cleared his throat nervously, obviously wanting to diffuse the tension building in his small store. "Now see here," he began, but the Apache warrior silenced him with a single look that brooked no interference. "My name is Standing Wolf," the stranger told Elena, his voice gentle but strong. "I am of the Chiricahua Apache, and I have never seen a woman more beautiful than you are at this moment." Elena felt tears beginning to blur her vision. When was the last time anyone had called her beautiful? Jake certainly never used such words anymore, preferring to criticize her appearance and compare her unfavorably to other women in town. She had begun to believe that her value as a person had disappeared along with her youth and happiness. Standing Wolf reached into a small leather pouch at his belt and withdrew something that made both Elena and Morrison gasp in surprise. It was a piece of turquoise, perfectly shaped and polished to a brilliant blue-green shine that seemed to capture all the colors of a summer sky. Standing Wolf held the turquoise stone toward Elena, its surface catching the morning light and throwing back reflections that seemed to dance with inner fire. The gem was roughly the size of a silver dollar, but its value clearly exceeded anything she had ever owned. The smooth stone had been shaped by skilled hands and polished until it gleamed like captured sky. "This belonged to my grandmother," Standing Wolf explained, his voice carrying the weight of generations. "She told me to give it only to a woman whose spirit shines brighter than her circumstances. I see that light in your eyes, even though someone has tried very hard to extinguish it." Elena stared at the offering, her heart racing with conflicting emotions. Accepting such a gift would be improper, possibly dangerous. Jake's jealousy was legendary in Willowbrook, and his reaction to discovering another man had given his wife anything would likely result in violence that would make her current. Injuries seemed mild by comparison, but something deeper than fear was stirring in her chest. For the first time in years, she felt seen and valued by another human being. Standing Wolf's steady gaze held no ulterior motives, no demands or expectations. He was offering her a gift freely, without strings or conditions, simply because he believed she deserved something beautiful. "I cannot accept this," she whispered, though every fiber of her being longed to reach out and touch the magnificent stone. "My husband would not understand. He would think, he would assume." Standing Wolf nodded with understanding that surprised her. "Your husband sounds like a man who lives in fear," he said quietly. "Fear makes people cruel and small. But you are neither of those things, even though you have been told otherwise for so long that you have begun to believe the lies." Morrison shifted nervously behind the counter, obviously uncomfortable with the intimate conversation taking place in his store. He began gathering Elena's supplies with exaggerated attention to detail, clearly hoping to end the encounter before it could develop into something that might bring trouble to his business. Standing Wolf carefully returned the turquoise to its pouch, but his eyes never left Elena's face. "I will be camped by Willow Creek for 3 days," he told her. "If you change your mind about the stone, or if you simply need someone to remind you of your own worth, you will find me there." Elena felt her cheeks burning with a mixture of shame and longing. Part of her wanted to follow this stranger immediately, to escape the suffocating prison of her marriage and discover what it might feel like to be treasured rather than tolerated. But years of conditioning held her frozen in place, unable to take even the smallest step toward freedom. The warrior gathered his purchased supplies and moved toward the door with the same quiet grace that had marked his entrance. As he reached for the handle, he paused and looked back at Elena one more time. "Your bruises will heal," he said with absolute certainty. "But the bruises on your spirit will remain until you decide they have no power over you anymore." The bell chimed as the door closed behind him, leaving Elena alone with Morrison and the echo of words that seemed to reverberate through her soul. She completed her shopping in stunned silence, her mind replaying every moment of the unexpected encounter. The walk home felt longer than usual, weighted down by thoughts and feelings she had buried for years under the necessity of survival. Alina found herself thinking about the way Standing Wolf had looked at her, not with the possessive hunger she had grown accustomed to from men, but with something approaching reverence. Her small house sat at the edge of town, isolated enough that Jake's periodic rages wouldn't disturb the neighbors too much. Alina pushed open the front door and immediately smelled the sour odor of whiskey and unwashed clothes that had become the permanent atmosphere of her home. Jake was slumped in his favorite chair, already drunk despite the early hour, his bloodshot eyes focused on her with the suspicious glare that had become his default expression whenever she returned from any errand that took her away from his direct supervision. "You took long enough," he slurred, gesturing vaguely at the supplies she carried. "What kept you?" Morrison getting too friendly with his customers again. Alina set the packages on the kitchen table and began unpacking them with mechanical efficiency. She had learned to move carefully around her husband when he had been drinking, keeping her responses minimal and her body language non-threatening. "There was another customer in the store," she said carefully, sorting the items according to Jake's preferred organization system. It took a few extra minutes. Jake's eyes narrowed with the paranoid suspicion that alcohol and insecurity had bred in him over the years. "What kind of customer? Anyone I know?" Alina hesitated for just a moment too long, and Jake's expression darkened further. He struggled to his feet with the unsteady movements of someone who had been drinking since dawn, his hands clenching into the fists that she knew could deliver devastating pain. "I asked you a question, woman. What kind of customer?" The memory of Standing Wolf's gentle eyes gave Alina a moment of unexpected courage. "An Apache man buying supplies for a hunting trip," she said, meeting her husband's gaze directly for the first time in months. He was polite and spoke good English. Jake's face turned an ugly shade of red as his worst fears about Indian threats seemed confirmed by his wife's casual report. His paranoid mind immediately jumped to the conclusion that the warrior's presence in town represented some kind of scouting mission for a larger attack. "An Apache?" Jake roared, his voice filling the small house with rage and alcohol fumes. "And you stood there chatting with him like he was some kind of gentleman caller? Are you completely stupid, woman? Don't you know what those savages do? 2 white women?" Lena backed away from his approaching fury, but the kitchen was small and offered few places to retreat. Jake's hand struck her shoulder with enough force to spin her around, sending her stumbling against the wooden counter. "I didn't chat with him," she protested, tasting blood where her teeth had cut the inside of her cheek. "I barely spoke at all. Mr. Morrison was there the entire time." But Jake was beyond rational thought, consumed by jealousy and the liquid courage that made him feel powerful and dangerous. His next blow caught her across the face, reopening the partially healed cut from their previous encounter, as Alina fell to the floor, her vision blurred by pain and tears. She found herself thinking about Standing Wolf's words about bruises on her spirit. For the first time, she began to wonder if healing might be possible after all. Alina woke before dawn, on the second day after her encounter with Standing Wolf, her body aching from Jake's latest beating, but her mind strangely clear. The house was silent except for her husband's drunken snoring from the bedroom, where he had collapsed the night before. She moved carefully through the darkness, gathering a few essential items and the small amount of money she had managed to hide from Jake over the past months. The decision had crystallized during the long, painful hours of the previous night. As she lay on the kitchen floor, where Jake had left her after his rage had exhausted itself, she could no longer pretend that her situation would improve or that enduring the abuse was somehow noble or necessary. Standing Wolf's words had planted a seed of hope that was now growing into determined action. Alina slipped out of the house like a ghost, her bare feet silent on the wooden porch steps. The pre-dawn air was cool against her bruised skin, carrying the sense of sage and distant rain clouds. She had never been outside alone at this hour, and the freedom felt both terrifying and exhilarating. The path to Willow Creek wound through stands of cottonwood trees and across meadows where wildflowers bloomed in defiant splashes of color against the harsh landscape. Alina had walked this route many times during her childhood, but never with such desperate purpose. Every step took her further from the life she had known and closer to an uncertain future that somehow seemed less frightening than the guaranteed misery of staying with Jake. As she crested the small hill that overlooked the creek, Alina could see smoke rising from a carefully maintained campfire near the water's edge. Her heart began racing with a mixture of anticipation and terror. What if Standing Wolf had changed his mind about her? What if his offer of friendship had been nothing more than polite conversation with no real meaning behind it? Standing Wolf emerged from the trees carrying an armload of firewood just as Alina reached the edge of his camp. His eyes took in her appearance with immediate understanding, noting the fresh bruises and cuts that decorated her face and arms. But instead of the pity or anger she expected to see, his expression showed only gentle acceptance and quiet strength. "Was beginning to worry you might not come," he said simply, setting down the wood and gesturing for her to join him beside the fire. "Your husband's anger was worse than I expected." Alina sank gratefully onto a blanket he had spread near the flames, her legs trembling from the long walk and emotional exhaustion. "I don't know what I'm doing," she admitted, her voice barely audible above the crackling fire and babbling creek. "I've never done anything like this before. I've never defied Jake so completely." Standing Wolf settled beside her with the easy grace that seemed to characterize all his movements. He reached into his supplies and produced a small pot of what appeared to be herbal salve, its green color and earthy scent suggesting ingredients gathered from the desert plants she couldn't identify. "This will help with the pain and speed the healing," he explained, offering her the container. "My grandmother taught me to make it from desert sage and other plants that grow near water sources. It has helped many people over the years." Alina accepted the salve with trembling hands, touched by his practical kindness. Jake had never offered comfort after his rages, preferring to pretend that his violence had never occurred rather than acknowledge the damage he inflicted as she carefully applied the soothing mixture to her injuries. Standing Wolf prepared a simple breakfast of dried meat, flat bread, and coffee that tasted better than anything she had eaten in months. They ate in comfortable silence while the sun climbed higher and painted the creek valley in shades of gold and amber. "Tell me about your life before your husband," Standing Wolf said eventually, his tone encouraging but not demanding. "What did you dream about when you were young?" The question caught Alina off guard. It had been so long since anyone had asked about her dreams or desires that she had almost forgotten they had ever existed. Slowly, haltingly, she began to speak about her childhood on her parents' small farm, her love of reading and learning, her dreams of perhaps becoming a teacher or traveling to see the world beyond the frontier. Standing Wolf listened with the focused attention of someone who genuinely cared about her answers. He asked thoughtful questions that encouraged her to remember parts of herself that had been buried under years of Jake's criticism and control. "Those dreams are not dead," he said when she finished speaking. "They have been sleeping, waiting for you to become strong enough to pursue them again. A person's true nature cannot be destroyed, only hidden temporarily." Alina felt tears beginning to flow, but they were different from the tears of pain and frustration she had shed so often. During her marriage, these were tears of recognition, of hope, of possibilities she had thought were lost forever. "I don't know how to be strong," she confessed. "I don't even know who I am anymore without someone telling me what to think and feel and do. Jake has controlled every aspect of my life for so long that I've forgotten how to make decisions for myself." Standing Wolf reached into his medicine pouch and withdrew the beautiful turquoise stone he had shown her in Morrison's store. This time, Alina didn't hesitate to accept it when he placed it gently in her palm. "This stone has been in my family for 5 generations," he told her. Each woman who carried it was facing a moment when she had to choose between safety and freedom, between accepting limitations and embracing possibilities. They all chose courage, and that courage lives on in the stone itself. Alina closed her fingers around the smooth, warm surface of the turquoise, feeling its weight and significance. The stone seemed to pulse with energy, as if it truly did contain the strength and determination of the women who had carried it before her. "What happened to them?" she asked. "The women in your family who own this stone?" Standing Wolf smiled with obvious pride and love. "They became leaders, healers, teachers, and guides for their people. They raised children who carried on their strength and wisdom, They lived full lives on their own terms, despite the obstacles and challenges they faced. As the morning progressed, Alina found herself relaxing in ways she hadn't experienced in years. Standing Wolf's presence was calming and reassuring without being possessive or demanding. He seemed content to simply share space and conversation with her, asking nothing in return except her willingness to remember her own worth. But their peaceful interlude was interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats approaching rapidly through the trees. Elena's blood turned to ice water as she recognized the angry shouting that accompanied the sound of Jake's horse crashing through the underbrush. Standing Wolf rose smoothly to his feet, his hand resting casually on the knife at his belt. His entire posture shifted from relaxed companion to alert warrior in the space of a heartbeat, though his expression remained calm and controlled. "Stay behind me," he told Alina quietly, "and remember that you are no longer alone in facing whatever comes next." Jake burst through the line of cottonwood trees like a man possessed, his horse lathered with sweat from the hard ride, and his face twisted with a rage more intense than Alina had ever seen before. He held his rifle across his saddle, the barrel pointed generally in their direction, though not yet aimed with deadly precision. His bloodshot eyes took in the scene before him with the paranoid fury of a man whose worst suspicions appeared to be confirmed. "I knew it," he roared, his voice echoing off the creek banks and sending birds scattering from the nearby trees. "I knew you were sneaking around behind my back with this savage. Long has this been going on, you faithless whore?" Alina felt, her newfound courage wavering under the familiar assault of Jake's verbal abuse. But Standing Wolf's steady presence beside her provided an anchor of strength. The warrior had not moved or shown any sign of fear, though Alina could sense the coiled readiness in his posture that suggested he was prepared for whatever violence might come. "Your wife came here seeking help for injuries you inflicted, Standing," Wolf said calmly, his voice carrying clearly across the small clearing. "She has done nothing to shame herself or dishonor your marriage. The shame belongs entirely to the man who would beat a woman for speaking politely to a stranger." Jake's face turned an even deeper shade of red as the Apache warrior's words struck home. He swung down from his horse with the clumsy movements of someone still partially drunk, keeping his rifle trained on Standing Wolf while his free hand gestured wildly in Elena's direction. "Don't you dare tell me about my own wife," Jake snarled, spittle flying from his lips as his rage built to dangerous levels. "She belongs to me, legal and proper, and I'll discipline her however I see fit. No dirty Indian is going to interfere." With a Christian marriage, Alina watched this confrontation with growing horror. Realizing that her decision to seek help had potentially put Standing Wolf in mortal danger, Jake's prejudices and jealousy had combined with his drinking to create a situation that could easily end in bloodshed. "Please," she said, stepping forward despite Standing Wolf's protective positioning. "Jake, I'll come home with you right now. Let's put down the rifle, and we can talk about this like civilized people." But Jake was beyond the reach of reason or negotiation. His paranoid mind had constructed an elaborate fantasy of betrayal and adultery that no amount of truth or logic could dispel. In his twisted thinking, Elena's simple act of seeking medical help had become evidence of the worst kind of marital infidelity. "Talk," Jake laughed harshly, the sound more like a bark than human humor. "The time for talking is over, woman. You made your choice when you came running to this savage instead of staying home where you belong. Now you can watch what happens to men who interfere with other people's property." Jake raised his rifle with the deliberate slowness of someone savoring the moment, his finger moving toward the trigger with obvious intent. Lena screamed and started to throw herself between the two men, but Standing Wolf caught her arm and gently but firmly moved her aside. "A warrior does not hide behind women," he said quietly, his dark eyes fixed on Jake with unwavering calm. "And a man with honor does not threaten unarmed people who have offered only kindness and healing." Instead of the fear Jake had expected to see, Standing Wolf's response showed only disappointment and sadness at the necessity of violence. This calm reaction seemed to unnerve Jake more than anger or pleading might have done. "You think I'm afraid?" "Of you?" Jake demanded, though his voice had lost some of its earlier certainty. "You think some heathen savage can intimidate a white man with legal rights and proper backing?" Standing Wolf slowly reached into his belt and withdrew his knife. A beautiful weapon with a carved bone handle and a blade that gleamed like captured starlight. But instead of assuming a fighting stance, he knelt and placed the weapon on the ground between them. "I am not armed with firearms," Standing Wolf said clearly. "If you shoot me now, you will be killing an unarmed man in front of a witness. Even frontier justice might question such an act." Alina realized what Standing Wolf was doing. By disarming himself and pointing out the legal implications of cold-blooded murder, he was forcing Jake to confront the reality of what he was contemplating. Jake might be drunk and enraged, but he wasn't completely stupid. Killing an unarmed Apache in front of his own wife would bring unwanted attention from territorial authorities. Jake's rifle wavered slightly as conflicting impulses warred in his alcohol-clouded mind. His finger remained on the trigger, but doubt had begun to creep into his expression. Alina could see him struggling with the practical consequences of murder versus the emotional satisfaction of eliminating what he perceived as a threat to his ownership of his wife. "You're trying to trick me," Jake said, though his voice lacked conviction. "This is some kind of Indian magic or cunning meant to make me lower my guard." Standing Wolf remained kneeling, his hands visible and empty, his posture non-threatening despite the obvious danger he faced. "There's no magic here," he said quietly. "Only a man choosing between wisdom and foolishness, between honor and shame." The standoff continued for what seemed like hours, but was probably only minutes. Lena watched her husband's face cycle through emotions like pages in a book: rage, fear, confusion, and something that might have been shame. The rifle barrel continued to waver as Jake struggled with the decision that would define the rest of his life. Finally, Standing Wolf spoke again, his voice carrying the weight of absolute truth. "Your wife is not your property," he said simply. "She is a human being with her own thoughts, feelings, and right to safety. If you cannot see that, then you have already lost her, whether you pull that trigger or not." Jake's face crumpled suddenly, the fight draining out of him like air from a punctured bladder. The rifle dropped to point at the ground as he seemed to realize the futility of trying to hold on to something through force and fear. Lena had never seen her husband look so defeated, so lost and confused. "She's all I have," Jake said, his voice breaking with unexpected vulnerability. "Without her, I'm nothing. It's just another drunk making trouble in a nowhere town." Standing Wolf rose slowly to his feet, his movements careful and non-threatening. "A man who must force a woman to stay with him has already lost everything worth having," he said gently. "Love that grows from fear is not love at all." Lena felt her heart breaking, not with renewed affection for Jake, but with pity for the broken man he had become. She could see now that his violence had grown from desperation and self-hatred rather than strength or conviction. But understanding his motivations didn't change the fact that staying with him would destroy them both. The silence that followed Jake's broken admission stretched across the creek valley like a heavy blanket, broken only by the gentle sound of water flowing over smooth stones and the distant call of a meadowlark. Alina watched her husband struggle with emotions he had buried under years of drinking and violence, seeing perhaps for the first time the frightened, lonely man beneath the bully's facade. Standing Wolf remained perfectly still, allowing Jake the space to process his revelation. Without pressure or judgment, the warrior's patience was remarkable, Alina thought, especially considering that moments ago he had been facing the barrel of a loaded rifle. His ability to show compassion, even toward someone who had threatened his life, spoke to a depth of character that left her amazed and humbled. Jake slowly lowered his rifle until it rested against his leg, the immediate threat of violence dissipating like morning mist. His shoulders sagged with the weight of accumulated failures and lost opportunities, making him appear older than his 35 years. "I know I ain't been a good husband," Jake said eventually, his voice thick with shame and whiskey. "I know. I hurt you more than I should have, Alina, but I don't know how to be different. This is all I learned from my own father and his father before him." Alina felt a complex mixture of emotions washing over her as she listened to Jake's confession. Part of her ached with sympathy for the damaged child he must have been, raised in violence and taught that love meant possession. But another part of her, the part that had been beaten down and terrorized for 2 years, remained unmoved by his explanations. Knowing where the hurt comes from doesn't make it stop hurting, she said quietly, her fingers unconsciously touching the fresh bruises on her face. And it doesn't mean I have to keep accepting it because you don't know any other way to be. Jake flinched as if she had struck him, the truth of her words hitting harder than any physical blow. He looked around the peaceful creek valley as if seeing it clearly for the first time, taking in the evidence of his wife seeking comfort and healing from a stranger, because her own husband provided nothing but pain. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "How do I fix this? How do I make things right between us?" Lena looked at Standing Wolf, drawing strength from his steady presence. The turquoise stone in her pocket seemed to pulse with warmth, reminding her of the generations of strong women who had faced similar moments of choosing between safety and freedom. "You can't fix this, Jake," she said with a certainty that surprised her. "Too much damage has been done. Too much trust has been broken. I can't spend the rest of my life walking on eggshells, never knowing when your next rage will put me in the ground permanently." Jake's face went through another series of expressions, settling finally on a mixture of grief and resignation. "So, you're choosing him over me," he said, gesturing toward Standing Wolf. "Choosing some Indian warrior over your lawful husband." Lena shook her head firmly. "I'm not choosing him over you, Jake. I'm choosing myself over the person I become when I'm with you. I'm choosing to live instead of just survive." Standing Wolf spoke for the first time in several minutes, his voice gentle but clear. "Your wife is not choosing me," he told Jake. "She is choosing freedom from fear, dignity over degradation. Any man worth the name would want these things for the woman he claims to love." Jake stared at the Apache warrior with something approaching wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe that his rival was defending Elena's right to independence rather than claiming her as his own prize. The concept of love without ownership seemed foreign to his understanding of relationships. "You ain't going to take her with you?" Jake asked, confusion evident in his voice. "Then what's this all about? What's the point of helping her if you don't want nothing in return?" Standing Wolf smiled with genuine warmth, the expression transforming his face from merely handsome to radiantly beautiful. "The point is that she deserves help simply because she is a human being in pain.
The point
Is that kindness needs no justification beyond the opportunity to practice it." Alina felt tears beginning to flow again, but these were tears of gratitude and recognition rather than pain or fear. In Standing Wolf's simple statement, she heard an entire philosophy of life that was completely different from everything she had known. The idea that she might be worthy of kindness simply for existing, not for what she could provide or endure, was revolutionary. Jake struggled to his feet, swaying slightly from exhaustion and the effects of his drinking. He looked old and defeated, a man who had finally run out of anger and bluster. The rifle hung forgotten in his hands as he stared at his wife with something that might have been love. If love could exist alongside the desire to control and possess, "I reckon I always knew this day would come," he said quietly. "Deep down, I knew you were too good for the likes of me. I just didn't want to admit it, so I tried to make you smaller instead of trying to make myself better." Lena approached her husband cautiously, unsure of his mood or intentions. When she was close enough, she gently took the rifle from his unresisting hands and passed it to Standing Wolf, who set it safely aside. "You could still choose to be better, Jake," she said with genuine compassion. "Not for me, because that chance is gone, but for yourself. You don't have to keep living this way, hurting yourself and everyone around you." Jake looked at her for a long moment, memorizing her face as if he knew he would never see her again. "Where will you go?" he asked. "What will you do without a husband to provide for you?" Alina touched the turquoise stone in her pocket, drawing strength from its smooth surface and the legacy of courage it represented. "I'll figure it out," she said with more confidence than she had felt in years. "I can't survive on my own for so long that I started to believe it, but I'm stronger than they think, stronger than I thought." Standing Wolf stepped forward and placed his hand gently on Jake's shoulder, a gesture of surprising compassion given their recent confrontation. "There is a trading post 2 days' ride south of here," he told the broken man. "The owner is looking for someone to help with the books and inventory. He doesn't ask many questions about a man's past, only whether he can work hard and stay sober." Jake nodded slowly, understanding the gift he was being offered, a chance to start over, to become someone different than the man who had driven away. The only good thing in his life. It wasn't much, but it was more hope than he had possessed an hour ago. "I'll head out this afternoon," Jake said, his voice stronger than it had been since his arrival. "Elena, I'm sorry. For everything. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for." 6 months later, Lena stood on the porch of the small schoolhouse she had helped build in the Apache village of Dancing Springs, watching the sun paint the desert mountains in shades of gold and crimson. The bruises on her face had long since faded, replaced by the healthy glow of someone who slept peacefully and woke each morning without fear. Her hair, once dull and lifeless from stress and poor treatment, now shone with the vitality that comes from proper care and genuine happiness. The children's laughter echoed. From inside the adobe building where she had been teaching, reading, and writing to both Apache and Mexican children whose families had settled in the area, the work was challenging but deeply rewarding, utilizing skills and knowledge she had thought were lost forever during her years of marriage to Jake. Each day brought new proof that she was capable of far more than anyone, including herself, had believed possible. Standing Wolf emerged from the trees carrying water from the nearby spring, his movements as graceful and purposeful as they had been that first morning by Willow Creek. Their relationship had developed slowly and naturally. Over the months, built on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than desperation or need, he had never pressured her for more than she was ready to give, allowing her to heal and rediscover herself at her own pace. "The Henderson family arrived this afternoon," he told her, setting down the water containers with careful attention to their placement. "They're the ones I mentioned who lost their farm to drought back in Kansas. Mrs. Henderson is a trained midwife. Her husband knows blacksmithing. They'll be valuable additions to our community." Elena smiled at his use of the word "our" when referring to the village. Standing Wolf had made it clear from the beginning that her place among his people was not dependent on their personal relationship. She had earned acceptance and respect through her own contributions and character. Not as an extension of his status or protection, the Apache community had embraced her, with a warmth and acceptance that still amazed her after months of experience. They judged people by their actions and character rather than their past mistakes or circumstances. Elena's willingness to learn their customs, contribute to their welfare, and treat everyone with respect had earned her a permanent place in their social structure. "How are they adjusting to the idea of their children attending school with Apache students?" Elena asked, remembering some of the initial resistance she had encountered from other white families who had settled in the area. Standing Wolf's expression showed the patient understanding of someone who had dealt with cultural prejudices his entire life. Like most people, they're cautious at first, but when they see their children laughing and learning alongside Apache children, when they realize that knowledge has no color or tribe, they begin to change their thinking. Elena nodded, remembering her own journey from the narrow prejudices Jake had tried to instill in her to the broader understanding she had gained through direct experience with Apache culture. The transformation had been gradual but profound, opening her eyes to the richness and wisdom of a way of life she had been taught to fear and despise. As evening approached, families began gathering in the village center for their weekly communal meal and storytelling session. Elena had learned to prepare traditional foods alongside the Apache women, her cooking skills expanding to include recipes passed down through generations. The sense of belonging and contribution she felt during these gatherings was unlike anything she had experienced during her previous life. Young children ran between the cooking fires, their games and laughter a testament to the peace and security that existed within the village boundaries. Elena watched them with a mixture of joy and wonder, remembering how different her own childhood had been and how much healing could occur when people felt truly safe and valued. Standing, Wolf's grandmother, a woman called Singing Dove, approached with a beautiful woven basket filled with cornbread and dried fruit. At 93 years old, she moved with the careful dignity of someone who had witnessed the passage of decades and the changes they'd brought to the world around her. "The turquoise stone has found its proper home," Singing Dove said in her careful English, her dark eyes twinkling with satisfaction. "I can see its power working in you, child. You carry yourself like a woman who knows her own worth." Elena touched the precious stone that now hung around her neck on a leather cord standing. Wolf had made for her, The turquoise had become a symbol of her transformation from victim to survivor to someone who could help others find their own strength and dignity. "Your grandmother's gift saved my life," Alina told Standing Wolf, her voice thick with emotion. "Not just by giving me something beautiful to hold on to, but by helping me remember that I deserved beautiful things." Standing Wolf took her hand gently, his touch warm and reassuring in the gathering darkness. Their physical relationship had developed as naturally as their emotional bond. Without force or pressure, based on mutual desire and respect rather than obligation or desperation. "She knew you would understand its meaning," he replied, his voice carrying the deep contentment of someone who had found his proper place in the world. "The stone chooses its own carriers, and it is never chosen wrongly." As the evening progressed, Alina found herself thinking about Jake and wondering how he was managing at the trading post Standing Wolf had recommended. She had received one. A letter from him several months ago, written in his careful, unschooled handwriting. He was sober, working hard, and slowly learning to live with himself. The letter had contained no demands or attempts at reconciliation. It's only a simple acknowledgement of the harm he had done and gratitude for the chance to start over. Alina had written back once, a brief note wishing him well and encouraging him to continue his efforts at self-improvement. She felt no anger toward him anymore, only sadness for the years they had both wasted in a relationship, built on fear and control rather than love and partnership. Standing Wolf had read both letters without jealousy or concern, understanding that Elena's compassion for her former husband was a sign of her healing rather than a threat to their relationship. His emotional security and trust were gifts Alina treasured. So different from the possessive jealousy that had characterized her marriage. As the storytelling portion of the evening began, Lena settled beside Standing Wolf on a comfortable blanket. Surrounded by the extended family that had adopted her as one of their own, an elderly warrior began recounting the legend of how the first turquoise stone had been created by the tears of a woman who chose courage over safety, wisdom over fear. Alina listened to the familiar story with new understanding, recognizing herself in the ancient tale of transformation and redemption. She had become part of a tradition that stretched back through generations of strong women who had faced difficult choices and emerged victorious. The stars were brilliant overhead, unmarred by the smoke and noise of large settlements. Lena had learned to read the constellations from Standing Wolf and the other Apache teachers, adding astronomical knowledge to her expanding understanding of the natural world. "Ah!" Standing Wolf asked quietly, his voice barely audible above the storyteller's dramatic recitation. Alina smiled up at the vast sky, feeling small and infinite at the same time. "I'm thinking about how much my life has changed since that morning in Morrison's store. I'm thinking about how grateful I am that you looked at me when I asked you not to." Standing Wolf's hand found hers in the darkness, their fingers intertwining with the natural ease of two people who had found their perfect complement. "I'm thinking about how beautiful you look in the firelight," he replied, "and how proud I am to be part of your story of becoming who you were always meant to be." Alina leaned against his shoulder, feeling completely safe and valued for the first time in her adult life. The girl who had whispered, "Don't look at me," in shame and fear, had grown into a woman who could meet anyone's gaze with confidence and dignity. The transformation was complete, but the adventure of building a life based on love and respect was just beginning.